Grand Conservancy District, where I served as the Chief Executive Officer of that organization for 7 years. And that's my short bio.
Hi, so yes, my name is Nat Chakeres. I was born in Santa Fe, and I am currently the general counsel to the state engineer. I oversee staff of about 45 members of our legal program, as about half of those whom are attorneys. And I've been in this role for about the same length of time that the state engineer has been in his role. We both came in at about the exact same time, but I was at the agency for some period of years before that. So I started with the agency 5 years ago last week, and I have worked with the Interstate Stream Commission. I've also been the deputy general counsel for this office of the state engineer, and I'm, as I just mentioned, for about almost the past 2 years, not quite, been the general counsel for the agency. Before working at the Office of the State Engineer, I spent a little bit of time in private practice, and before that, I was an attorney with the United States Department of Justice doing environmental enforcement, assigned to the Region 6 enforcement team. So that corresponds to EPA regions. So that included New Mexico, although there were some more critical environmental enforcement matters elsewhere in the region, including the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So I spent a lot of time litigating in that case, which was the sort of largest environmental civil case in American history. I went to UNM Law School, and yeah, just happy to be here. And we're confronting problems head on and seeing what we can do to help as many people as we can possible, helping as many people as we can as we're facing these water challenges.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much for being here. And again, if you've just joined us, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Please stay muted until our speakers are done. But if you have questions, you can put those in the chat and we'll call on you towards the end. And with that, let's start our conversation.
Great. I thought this evening it would be the approach that I can take is because of my background in history and water management, federal projects management, water operations within the system, as well as a number of really challenging issues that have come up during my career, which is we had the situations of a lot of water in the 1980s up through early 2000s that had its own degree of challenges and issues, and then about a 20+ year drought that followed that, and that's created another intense number of issues to address, and that's one of the primary focuses of the state water agencies is to, as Nat said earlier, to help as many people prepare for and be aware of the issues that we face with the drought period that we're in right now. That's also being exacerbated by climate change that is indeterminate about what kind of added pressure that is placing on the system. But we certainly know with one of the hottest summers on record that we just experienced that, and the intense firestorm that we faced a year ago, that these climate change challenges are really stressing the system. And we're not exactly sure where that's going to take us, but we certainly want to be in a position to prepare ourselves to be as resilient as possible in the face of these situations. But this evening, I wanted to give you a historical perspective to start with, then speak about some of the details about where we are today with our water situation, and then talk about what we're doing at the state and other levels of water management, federal, local, tribal, and other collaboration that we must do to help address these challenges. In the early 19th century, we had the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that really opened the door for mass migration, if you will, into the region, and it began to show a lot of development from probably a relatively free-flowing and pristine river situation to a gradual development with lots of agricultural growth in the San Luis Valley and in the Middle Rio Grande, and the historic communities that were below in the Albuquerque region and also down in the Las Cruces and El Paso regions were beginning to feel the intense development that was happening upstream, water diversions that were starting to show a degree of shortages that were challenging the communities. There was also a somewhat unfettered grazing in the watersheds that denuded a lot of the upland areas and the watersheds of the vegetation that was necessary to keep the sediments and debris in place in order for us to manage the systems. And what happened in the Middle Rio Grande in particular was a lot of sedimentation and water shortages that were developing. There was a lot of complaints issued to the United States, and the Secretary of Interior at that time issued an embargo on further development within the San Luis Valley and the Rio Grande corridor above that lower Rio Grande area. That was led to a number of other things, but the Bureau of Reclamation also established the Rio Grande project in 1905. It's one of the most earliest reclamation projects, but that was also designed to meet its U.S. treaty obligations to Mexico that was negotiated in 1906. Granting Mexico 60,000 acre-feet of water directly from the system at that time. And then later, Elephant Butte was constructed in 1916, along with a lot of irrigation systems to essentially irrigate 150,000 plus acres down in the lower Rio Grande. That development pressures and the Colorado River Compact that was signed in 1922 set a high bar for New Mexico at that time for the three states to actually come up with its own compact. And in 1928, they launched the joint investigations of the region in order to understand the ebbs and flows, if you will, of the water supply in the region. And they developed a compact that I'll talk about in a little bit of detail, but also around that time, the New Mexico in the Middle Rio Grande was suffering a lot of sedimentation and waterlogging of the farmlands, and there was a desperate need to protect the areas from flood control. So they went ahead and had the legislature approve the Conservancy Act of 1923, which put a lot of wheels in motion associated with developing the water supplies with a flood control, drainage, and irrigation systems for roughly 123,000 acres was the target at that time. So through these joint investigations of the three states in the United States, they developed a series of index and delivery obligations, both in Colorado and New Mexico, in order to protect, quote, the Rio Grande project, to allow it to have at full development some 790,000 acre-feet available to that area, that for those lands below the Elephant Butte outlet. Also, El Vado was constructed during the period of 1928 and 1933. That's was the reservoir for the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District supplemental supply that helped assure both supplies to the Middle Valley and to the 6 Middle Rio Grande Pueblos that were protected through the acts of 1928 and 35 to allow for facilities to be constructed through Pueblo lands, but also to guarantee them their paramount water for their future use and development. The compact also developed, had the foresight to develop a system of debits and credits that allowed both Colorado and New Mexico to run up a certain amount of underdelivery and then to utilize water if they have, in specific manners, if they have overdeliveries, which are called credits. And then there was another limitation placed on post-compact reservoirs, of which El Vado was one of those, and McClure Reservoir up in the Santa Fe watershed. Restrictions for storage when under Article 7 of the compact when the project supply drops below 400,000. So these are all the institutional constraints, if you will, that were placed on the Middle Rio Grande and in Colorado as a result of trying to maintain the status quo of the irrigation targets. And in New Mexico, the index delivery requirements peak out in terms of our abilities to divert and deplete water at 400,000 acre feet. Anything above that, above roughly about 1 million acre feet that flows past the Otoe gauge, has to be delivered down to Elephant Butte. And that's a big challenge for New Mexico. And knowing this, several things were put into place during the drought of the 1950s. The Flood Control Acts of 1948 and 50, as a result of massive floods that happened in the 40s, was put into place to allow the Bureau of Reclamation and the Corps of Engineers to build flood protection facilities in the Middle Rio Grande, as well as manage the channel for sediment and water transport down to Elephant Butte. It was apparent in the deep drought of the 50s that could not be accomplished. So the United States built the low flow conveyance channel from approximately Socorro, New Mexico, down to the Elephant Butte Reservoir outfall. And that's called the Santa Casia Reach in that area. That was also the area where the village, or the town at the time, a pretty good sized town, was wiped out by a serious flood in the 1940s and never recovered. Then as time went on, we had several things happen. In 1956, it was apparent that we would struggle. Our state engineer at the time had the foresight to declare the basin to groundwater development that would require any additional appropriations of groundwater, because they were drilling wells to survive, basically, both there and in the Lower Rio Grande during the deep drought of the 50s. And it was apparent that we needed to manage and control groundwater pumping in the Middle Rio Grande in order to prevent over diversions and further exacerbate the state's abilities to meet its compact obligations. So that was something that I'll talk about in a minute, about how important it is to do conjunctive surface and groundwater management in order for us to protect the resource as well as survive in times of shortage. Then, as time goes on, we had the spill at Elephant Butte that wiped out all the debts for both of the states. We had, as I mentioned, we had a great water supply situation from essentially 1985 all the way up until roughly 2019 from the standpoint of compact deliveries. We went into debit a few times in those years, but were able to pull ourselves out and also achieve some credits that allowed us to fully optimize that system, with El Vado being able to store those credits and balance the demands against the supplies relatively easily, with the exception of certain short periods of drought in that time frame. We also had, the suit filed by Texas against New Mexico in 2013, and that has also led to what we hope is a settlement that the U.S. Supreme Court will adopt and have us implement sometime this coming spring, assuming we can get through any possible other exceptions that might be filed. And I think Matt, you might talk about that a little bit too. But really, what happens in the Lower Rio Grande impacts the Middle Rio Grande. If we continue to stay in compact debit, that really restricts our operational flexibilities within the Middle Rio Grande. It also continues to short surface water that is owed essentially from the Middle Rio Grande to the Rio Grande project, that also exacerbates the groundwater withdrawal situation down in the Lower Rio Grande. So what we're doing at State Engineer's Office in concert with the Interstate Stream Commission is to look at it much more holistically as a total operational scenario that allows us to balance our compact deliveries and also meet a potentially new obligation at the Texas state line that will be quite a challenge for the agency to do that, as well as continue to meet our Middle Rio Grande compact obligations. Some of the things that we also were facing and was recognized way back in 1928 is that we wanted to essentially cap the depletions above ODOE at the 1928 condition. So that keeps that system above ODOE pretty much intact and in balance from a surface water perspective there. We also, the state engaged in trying to fully capitalize on its Colorado River compact allocation. And the San Juan Chama project was born, and it was implemented and put in place in 1970. And that allowed for the Middle Rio Grande and Rio Grande corridor, several contractors, mostly municipalities, to contract for, on average, about 80,000 acre foot of supply there. When we do have full supply conditions, they can deliver 96,200 acre feet to the Middle Valley, and that really helps manage for shortages, because San Juan Chama water is a great resource in that it can be essentially utilized to extinction, and by that I mean there is no requirement for the return flows to become anybody else's water, right, like it is for the native supplies. So it was quite a great boost to the system. It bought us a lot of time relative to the shortages that were experienced in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It provides a lot of flexibility in a number of operational scenarios. The unfortunate thing, though, relative to recent drought, is we've had what they call the triple dip La Nina that started in 2020. And that was the first year where we went down the slide of continual underdeliveries to the Rio Grande Compact, and we've accumulated to date 95,000 acre foot of underdelivery, and we're not technically in violation. That doesn't occur until we pass the 200,000 acre foot debit. But we've experienced shortages in the San Juan Chama project, a couple of years close to 40% of shortages, which was never experienced before. And we've had late season shortages in the Middle Valley because of the fact that we're in compact debit and cannot technically use Alvado Reservoir, even though there's another physical reason for that, and that is it's being reconstructed due to a dam safety issue. But that should be completed hopefully in 2026, 2027, so that we can have full use of the reservoir as it was prior to falling into debit and having the dam safety restrictions placed upon it. The other thing that we are really focused on in the Middle Rio Grande is working to enhance the low flow conveyance channel, get it back into some semblance of operation that would be environmentally palatable to our endangered species obligations, and to also increase really quality habitat in the Santa Casa Reach. But without the low flow conveyance channel being operational under certain conditions, we feel like we're not going to be able to continue to dig out of compact debit and to put us back into that balanced operational scenario that we enjoyed during that 1985 to 2019 period that allowed us to do a number of things, meeting demands and also helping to achieve our ESA compliance in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. So with that, I wanted to just kind of touch on some major, short-term actions that we're focused on, and then discuss a few long-term actions that need to be taken in order for us to kind of have all hands on deck, if you will, or a multi-pronged approach to solving some of these almost intractable problems that we face within the Middle Rio Grande. I think we've learned, working with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District over the last several years, that we can scale our diversions to the amount of available supply in a way that continues to allow a level of bypass and ESA operations that we didn't fully understand in the past. And the Office of the State Engineer worked closely and the Interstate Stream Commission with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to scale their diversions to the needed depletions. So we've done that the last 2-3 water short years. And we also worked with them during these high flows to try to optimize deliveries down to Elephant Butte as well. We worked with the legislature 2 years ago to get funding for a dynamic fallowing program in the Middle Rio Grande that would help our agricultural community, so kind of bridge to the future, if you will, to allow them an opportunity to fallow some fields during water short periods, and to allow us to continue to operate to meet the compact obligations. And there's also an environmental leasing program that the Bureau of Reclamation and the MRGCD are implementing to keep water in key habitat sites below the Zleta diversion dam. That's been very relatively successful as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we need to address the high loss reach of the Santa Casa stream system and cooperate the low flow conveyance channel in a favorable manner. And then looking forward to a full Elvado dam capacity that will really allow us to fully operate our system in a proactive manner. We also have to fully capitalize on the current state and federal funding that's available to completely address these infrastructure and human capacity development needs within our state as a whole, but also specifically in the Middle and Lower Rio Grande. And the legislature have stepped forward this last year to provide resources to us to prepare for the Supreme Court consent decree implementation in the Lower Rio Grande, which will have some implications and some funding needs to work on developing the efficiency improvements in the Middle Rio Grande as well. Some other longer-term actions is to really start to reimagine new agricultural systems for depletions utilization, and to have a productive agricultural system, but with a lot less direct use of water. There's several improvements that need to be made to the surface water delivery systems, and there's several on-farm programs that we want to help leverage with the Department of Agriculture that can both take a look at marginal lands that may not be productive and convert systems in the agricultural sector to improve their productivity and their bottom line for farming, but also to reduce the overall depletions in the Middle Rio Grande. Also create a managed conjunctive use strategies through intensive administration of groundwater. I think if you're developing drip irrigation systems and other mechanisms for delivery of water for agricultural purposes, you need a pressurized system, and I think with a proper use of surface and groundwater, managed wisely with good instrumentation, I think you can have a combination of shallow groundwater use and surface water that would be quite productive for agriculture, but doesn't, but also allows you to reduce depletions and actually improve the agricultural bottom line in terms of their productivity. Stormwater capture is another big area of opportunity for us. We're looking at that down in the Lower Rio Grande, but there's a lot of federal money. Public Law 566 in the NRCS has lots of funding for 100% federal, in some cases, projects that can do watershed protection and capture and reuse stormwater from the upland watersheds. And there's several of them within the Middle Valley that would fit the bill there, and we've identified several also down in the Las Cruces Basin area. And then one area that's ripe for reimagination and rethinking is optimizing our current authorizations for flood control reservoirs. We did a little bit of that under the WRDA bill in 2020, working collaboratively with the MRGCD and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo Water Utility Authority. We were able to get the ability to use both San Juan Chama water and native water in the Rio Chama to be stored and managed in Abiquiu Reservoir. And I think something similar along that line for any of the other flood control reservoirs should be looked at carefully. And also rethinking ways for us to get creative in terms of our Rio Grande Compact compliance, similar to what they're looking at in the Colorado River Basin as the 2007 operating guidelines expire in 2026. So there's a lot of opportunity, in my view, to really, take a look at all of our existing authorities and to try to optimize the system, what we have, fully capitalize on stormwater, and optimize the conjunctive use strategies with surface and groundwater to essentially hold ground with the anticipated loss of surface water due to declining snowpack volumes anticipated over the next 50 years here in New Mexico. So look forward to, working with all the agencies and these great opportunity with the state legislature and the federal government to utilize these funds in a very proactive manner to meet the needs of our Middle Rio Grande system.
Thanks. And so Mike kind of brought us from the history through the present and what the agency is looking on doing, just that the agency can do. What I'd like to talk about a little bit is what I get questions about the most, and that's people have genuine fear. What's going to happen? And we obviously we see climate change in front of us every day. We're going to get less water. What's going to happen? And to me, there's our fate is in our hands to some degree. We can't control them, single-handedly, whether humanity decides to reduce our emissions fast enough to really reverse or even stop some of the effects of climate change. But we can prepare for an orderly process to live on less water. And the reason we spend so much time, and the reason why Mike spent so much time talking about the Rio Grande Compact, is because that's likely to be the fulcrum on which major conflict is going to occur, if it's going to occur over water. And what I spend a lot of time thinking about, and what we're spending a lot of time planning for, is how do we try to ensure that conflict is not harmful, that there's an orderly plan in place to protect New Mexicans and their livelihoods and other values, frankly, that we value now that really were not on anybody's radar screen in the 20s and 30s and 50s. Environmental values, protection and honoring tribal sovereignty, those kinds of things. How are we going to ensure recreational values? How are we going to ensure that those things aren't given short shrift in this sort of legal system that didn't originally get set up to protect them? And to me, there's really four ways that legally sort of the cookie can crumble if New Mexico falls into a situation where it is no longer delivered enough water that it's in violation. As the state engineer stated, on the Rio Grande, we're not in that situation. We're below our delivery obligation, but we have a buffer zone. But it's not that big of a buffer zone. This is a real problem that could happen. If we underdeliver by a cumulative amount of 200,000 acre feet, we have violated the Rio Grande Compact. The compact doesn't specify exactly what happens then, but whatever it is, it's not going to be great. And to me, there's, again, really four ways that could come down. One is New Mexico just says, we're going to throw caution to the wind. Texas, come and do your worst. We're just gonna do our thing. That obviously isn't a very responsible way of managing it. And what would likely happen is we would have federal oversight over water in New Mexico at Texas's direction, and it would be likely large and arbitrary reductions in water use in New Mexico in ways that New Mexicans would have no control over. That's not a good outcome, and that's the thing we strive most to avoid. The second method that we have to manage when New Mexico, would be under delivering would be what the drafters of our Constitution and the drafters of our water code envisioned, and that is what's called priority administration, which, of course, every listener's heard that. It's not a great outcome either. Priority administration, in its strictest form, completely cuts off all but the most senior users until the senior users are satisfied. And due to the history of development in New Mexico, that would leave multiple communities with absolutely no water to drink, which I think would be a humanitarian crisis. Nobody would actually follow through to that extent, but it would leave other users who are junior, completely uncompensated. We don't know exactly how court battles over it, which would be certain would play out. So it's also unpredictable, which is not good for people planning their livelihoods. And it would have absolutely no inherent protection for environmental values. The Endangered Species Act would still likely apply, and so there'd be some checks on it, but there'd be no consideration in how the water is going to be managed to protect and enhance our environment if we're having to do strict priority administration. That's also an outcome that if we have to do it, we have to do it, because that's better than sort of some federal master coming in and taking water in ways that nobody has control over. But it's also not a preferred outcome. The third way that New Mexico could kind of resolve its way out of a crisis is just buyouts. We just throw money at the problem. We're doing a little of that, and any solution will include some component of that. So when the state engineer is talking about fallowing, that is compensated reductions in diversions of water. It's nice in the sense that it doesn't involuntarily cause any reductions in diversions, but it's expensive. Some folks think it's unfair and may reward sort of past wasteful practices. And ultimately, there's probably not enough money to buy our way out of our water shortage problem. I mean, if there were infinite money, you just pay a lot of farmers not to farm and wash your hands of it and be done. That's not likely also going to be either a politically or a sort of public policy wise palatable option. The fourth option is something that we call alternative administration, and it's an alternative to strict priority administration. And that is, in its best form, a planned method for reducing depletions that would have buy-in and input from all relevant sovereigns and other entities. It would have buy-in from stakeholders. It would be consensual on the part of the large water users, and it would be orderly, so people could predict their affairs. You don't have to make an investment in your farming if you know there's going to be a reduction coming along. Alternative administration is by far the better option of all of this whole suite, and the good news is we've done it, and it's worked before, albeit on smaller scales. So some of the smaller streams in New Mexico, we have very simple alternative administration plans. When there's a shortage, the water is shared. That was really the tradition before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in Chakeres and in Pueblo communities. It's something that was not recognized under priority administration, but we now have legal certainty that consensually people can go back to those kinds of systems. On a larger scale, the Pecos River in New Mexico we failed to deliver to Texas the amount of water that we were legally obligated to under a compact there. The Pecos is an order of magnitude smaller than the Rio Grande, but it's got a lot of very interesting and complicated dynamics to it, similar to the Rio Grande. And just not going through all of that in detail, although I'd love to, I love talking about the Pecos River. We came up with, again, we were facing the barrel of a gun of a federal takeover of the river that brought us there, and Norm Gaum was one of the architects of this. And it was an agreed plan whereby New Mexico, some of this was again the paid fallowing. Some farmland was taken out of production, but then there was also a plan to augment the supply of some senior users on the river under certain circumstances, in exchange for those senior rivers agreeing to send water to Texas when New Mexico really needed it. And the plan, there were a few, I'd say, second order flaws in how things were executed, but I would love to have the type of compact related outcome that we got on the Pecos in either the Lower Rio Grande or the Middle Rio Grande. We are currently right now on the Lower Rio Grande, hopefully settling litigation, which will, we're hoping, enable us to have sort of the best window we've had in probably 2 decades to come up with a consensus alternative administration plan in the Lower Rio Grande. In the Middle Rio Grande, I think we have a good window now, and we have several reasons for optimism there. Despite the dire outlook of water we are entering into sort of a new era of water planning. Last year, our legislature enacted a revitalized bill that lets us really do water planning that will help inform these kinds of divisions. It'll bring the right people to the table, the right groups to the table, that we can discuss. Okay, if we don't have enough water, what is it that we really need to ensure that we protect, and what is it that we can let go, and what's fair about, how do we make it fair, that division of water? And having everybody at the table to do that in a planning process, we think will be helpful. The 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos are also, they've requested a federal negotiating team so that we can negotiate their water rights claims and get them really quantified, and so that those water rights claims can all be turned into water rights that are recognized through a settlement with the state of New Mexico. We haven't begun the negotiation yet. We're still waiting on the federal government to kind of get their team in place. But that would ensure that an alternative administration plan would include and protect tribal water interests. And we also have, just as evidenced by this group, and the Bureau of Reclamation's basin study, a lot of interest in resolving New Mexico's water issues in the Middle Rio Grande in an orderly, fair fashion that vindicates the values that we now today treasure, even though they weren't spelled out in our Constitution or somewhere else. We have explicit legal sanction from the New Mexico courts that these alternative administration plans are acceptable under our, what appears to be rigid Constitution that says, thou shalt do priority administration. Our legislature and our courts have recognized we need more flexibility than that, and so they've given sanctions. So I want to sound, we have a lot of engineering, like the, reducing depletions in the Santa Casia Reach. We already are doing some really clever things with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District about voluntary reductions of deliveries to farmers. But ultimately, if we have conflict, if we violate the Rio Grande Compact, we're going to need something more, and that's what I'm spending my time thinking about and preparing for. And I actually I'm optimistic that we can get to a place where we, it's not going to happen overnight. Have a plan, and it's something we kind of have been trying to dance around for a long time, but I think we have a lot more urgency now. Thanks.
Well, thank you both so much. We're going to transition now to some of your questions. And so we're going to try this out and see how it works. I've got a list of some of the questions you've been typing into the chat here. And I'm going to call on your name. You can feel free to unmute and ask your question. Please be sure to keep it brief. We do have a number of questions, and we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to talk and to learn from our speakers here tonight. So we will start with Martin Zer. If you want to go ahead and unmute, you can ask your question. I see you've got two here, so I'll let you choose which one you would rather start with. Martin, are you on?
Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay, thank you. As a resident in the lower Middle Rio Grande region, and as a former vice president of the Middle Rio Grande Water Assembly, who worked a good 10 years on the regional long-term water plan for the Middle Rio Grande, I'm particularly concerned about not only the process, but the product that's emerging at this point. I'd like to have some confidence, but I don't get any reassurance here from either water managers or rural users like myself. So there's big questions as far as we have no compact with the Middle Rio Grande, and we have no guarantee in regards to the question of delivery. So the question then becomes, okay, where is the voice of the users in the process of formulating the state water plan? How is that third option that you mentioned legal in the context of senior water rights? And how are the interests of the water users, not only in the Middle Rio Grande, but also the Pueblos, the Chakeres, and the vast majority of peoples are protected while Intel continues to pump out thousands of gallons a day for their own personal use or money-making use, as well as other users that are getting priority as opposed to those with, in fact, senior water rights.
You put a lot into that question,
Yes.
but I'll
Multi-layered.
take part of it, and then I
I
think
try.
and then I'll ask Nat to cover some of the other water rights components of your question. But you know, as far as the voice in the Middle Rio Grande for water users, if you're an agricultural user and part of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, you have a voice there with your board of directors and their abilities to engage with state and federal and other governmental entities to protect your interests as a whole. But also what Nat had brought up earlier about Senate Bill 337, which is the Regional Water Resiliency Planning Act, is something that the Interstate Stream Commission and I wholeheartedly endorse, is to really re-engage and invigorate the regional water planning process to allow for everyone to have a voice in the next phase of water management in the Middle Rio Grande and across the state throughout all of the regions. So that's in an evolutionary stage at the moment because the bill was just passed this last session. And we have to go through a outreach and rulemaking process to make sure we get it right. But that's going to be one of the primary mechanisms for us to fully engage at the granular level with our constituents across the regions to get a full sense of what people are concerned about and where they would like to see the state go to help manage water in the future.
And I'll just answer a couple of your questions. I would just echo. I think a lot of rural users in Valencia County and Socorro County do share the concerns you express about who's sticking up for us. We're not Rio Rancho, we're not Intel. I think in the planning process, I mean, we've always had a lot of involvement, as you know from previously, but I think it's going to be done with a little bit more support this time. Agricultural users have always been at the center of it. I mean, agriculture uses approximately 4/5 of the human use of water in New Mexico, and one of the things that is a priority for us is maintaining the those communities that depend on agriculture and those ways of life and those values. So those voices are carried through MRGCD, as well as there's going to be our guidelines and regulations will have a lot of opportunity for folks to take part in the process, even outside of sort of the organized district. In terms of legality, so the various options I was laying out have been affirmed legally. The option of alternative administration, it is by and large a voluntary arrangement through the major water users, and so they've consented to it. Other water users who may have senior rights who are not a part of it may challenge it, and the legal standard is, would they be in a better position here or through strict priority administration? And the PECOS plan, which I alluded to, I didn't describe in detail. It actually put senior users. It kind of supercharged their supply. It actually ensured more water than they would get under a priority call. And so when some of those senior users challenged the legality of that under the priority administration constitutional doctrine, the court said, well, you can't show an injury from this plan, and so we are going to adopt the plan. So that's really the standard that people who don't want to take part in an alternative administration plan and want to challenge it would have to meet. And they'd have to show they're going to be put in a worse position under an alternative administration regime than they would otherwise. In terms of compensating people not to farm, those are just, I mean, essentially voluntary financial transactions that there's not a lot of reason why that one farmer would say another farmer or one user would challenge another user's decision made freely to not use their water right. That's really their choice.
Thanks. I've got a question from Norm. I'm going to go ahead and read that. So we'll start with you, Mike. So how will your office and the Interstate Stream Commission incentivize cooperation to develop a plan for sustainable resiliency of the Middle Rio Grande? And then what is the ISC's role in supporting collaborative water planning in the Middle Rio?
Okay. Well, I think the idea of going through a public outreach process to fully understand the scope of interest will be one of the first steps that we take. We want to make sure that all the major water users are engaged in the process. That's critically important. And that, there are 5 or 6 major water users in the basin, and 6 Middle Rio Grande pueblos will be a key component to a good regional water planning process. And the Interstate Stream Commission is charged with that function as part of their mission, is to lead and manage the planning process. So that's the entity that will have the state engineer support and the support of the legislature going forward with the adequate funding and staffing and the things that are necessary to perform a really robust water planning process, and that'll entail getting really good participation and coordination with the entities themselves, and we're hoping that they invest heavily in the coordination and activities and participate in that process.
And if I could just add, I mean, my personal view on getting an effective product out of the planning process, first of all, requires everything the state engineer stated, but it also, the participants need an incentive to put something on the table where they're giving up something. There's not enough water to go around to everywhere we want to use it. And so if you just have everybody in the room saying, this is everything I want, you're not going to come up with a way to actually reduce uses to the extent you need to. One of the roles that we're going to be playing, the Interstate Stream Commission, technical staff with the Office of the State Engineer, and probably legal input as well, is putting on the table what is needed. To how much are we going to need to be reducing by? What is the alternative if we don't have a planned reductions here? What is it going to look like for you? And providing that expert input that lays the choices out for the planning groups, I think that we're hoping to facilitate solutions from the groups based on the data and the facts in front of them that we can give them.
Thanks. I think Jeannie just had a question that's related to this idea of the regional water planning process. Jeannie, if you want to unmute and ask your question, you can jump in.
Yes, hi, I'm Jean Logston, League of Women Voters of Central New Mexico. I'm really interested in collaborative social problem solving. And what you're talking about, I think, is building support for collaboration where people will accept that shared sacrifice is necessary. And that, it's not temporary. It has to become part of our way of life. But how do you think the process can most usefully be set up, and what kind of timetable are you working on? Because I'm worried about the timing of this. To get this kind of process often takes a year or two to develop the level of commitment and engagement and then acceptance. And so it seems to me we've really got to get going on this. And so are we in process to begin this collaborative endeavor?
Well, thank you, Gina. I think that's a great question. We're building the framework to engage in the collaborative process, and that in itself requires outreach and collaboration just to design how the planning will work in the particular regions. We want it to be essentially a work of the entities themselves about how what are their values in each of the areas, and they vary across the state. What are the goals, and then also we have technical gaps to fill in parallel with the knowledge of our aquifers, both quantity and quality. That has to be done in parallel with our technical agencies and support from New Mexico Geology and Minerals and our other universities that can help us properly characterize the aquifers and even look at alternative supplies and brackish treatment and things like that may be available in regions as a planning mechanism as well. But the collaboration piece is built by hand essentially, and that's hard work, and it takes its own set of resilience and commitment through funding and staffing. I also want to fully engage the full spectrum of the Office of the State Engineer. It's not just an ISC project. It requires our water rights folks in each of the various districts to participate, as well as engagement from the New Mexico Environment Department and New Mexico Mineral Energy and Natural Resources Department, so that we're looking at it holistically as we develop the plans in each of the regions.
Yeah, to give concrete number, I mean, it is going to be multiple years. You're exactly right. These to put these together correctly, you don't do them overnight. The law that we referenced went into effect in July, and we already were starting laying the groundwork before that went into effect. But this is going to be a multi-year process, no question. And we, with the urgency of it, we can't move fast enough, but we have to do it right. So it will be years before we kind of have plans in hand at the end of the road.
And let me just add too that we're not going to just sit on our hands waiting for that to occur. We have great state and federal resources to. We know where some problems exist right now, and we need to tackle that. We need to build our human capacity, build the water workforce across the state in parallel with the planning work, as well as tackle some major infrastructure needs that are out there.
Thanks. Ralph, looks like you've got a question. If you want to unmute, just encourage you to keep it brief.
Hello, Mr. Hammond. I may have not heard you correctly, but early on in the presentation, in your talk, you spoke of what I thought I heard was a new obligation at the New Mexico-Texas state line that could present a big challenge for us. Could you describe that?
Certainly, and I might just put that on Nat's shoulders because he's really familiar with the nuances of the consent decree.
Yeah. So, hi, Ralph. So the Rio Grande Compact, when it was signed, it did not specify how much water New Mexico needed to deliver to Texas, and the reason for that had to do with there were all sorts of delivery points in the Mesilla Valley where canals and laterals would be crossing the state line back and forth, and drains and so forth. And the all of the agricultural land in the Mesilla Valley was under one unified irrigation project, the Rio Grande project. And so the people who drafted the Rio Grande Compact thought it wasn't necessary to specify exactly how much of the water in the Lower Rio Grande would go to Texas versus New Mexico. It was understood by everybody that all of the lands in that whole single irrigation project would get the same amount of water. If everybody got 2 acres in a year, everyone would get the same 2 acres. Since the 1930s, the project has splintered a little bit. There's a New Mexico irrigation district. There's a Texas irrigation district, and there was a lot of accusations by Texas that groundwater development in New Mexico was preventing the deliveries to Texas that it should have been getting. And New Mexico disagreed on a lot of the particulars, but we agreed with the fundamental premise that New Mexico couldn't just intercept all of the water from Elephant Butte with its own groundwater wells before any of it could get to Texas. I mean, there had to be some some amount of water that New Mexico left for Texas. And what we have agreed to with Texas is a consent decree that finally quantifies that. We think we've quantified it on terms that are relatively favorable to New Mexico in the sense that the amount of water New Mexico said was due to Texas in the litigation is what we put into the consent decree. So it's as if we won the trial. That's how much water we're delivering. Nonetheless, we will now have something on paper enforceable in court saying if you did not deliver this, there are consequences. And the settlement has more detail about what happens if we don't deliver than the original Rio Grande Compact did in the Middle Valley. I said there's really not a lot of specificity there. This has specificity, and it has significant consequences for New Mexico in the Lower Rio Grande if that water doesn't get delivered to Texas. I do want to emphasize one thing, though. It does not change anything about the Middle Rio Grande. So I've heard, some people are out there worried, oh, great, now they're going to take more water away from the Middle Rio Grande and to send it to Texas. The amount of water that we're allowed to use in the Middle Rio Grande is what the state engineer said. It's based on indexing, engaging formulas, and we have to deliver a certain amount of water to Elephant Butte. That obligation is unchanged. What we would like to do, though, is approach the whole river in a more holistic sense, so we're not pitting the Lower Rio Grande against the Middle Rio Grande or vice versa, where it's a tug of war between the two parts of one state. If we improve how we manage water in the Middle Rio Grande and we improve deliveries to Elephant Butte, it will give more flexibility and freedom to users in the Middle Rio Grande and in the Lower Rio Grande. So we're trying to get everybody to work together, but that's really the I hope that helped, Ralph, about our new obligation. It's something that would be imposed on us regardless, but we've sort of had an opportunity in settling the case to define it in a way that we think we can meet it.
Great, thanks. So our next question is from Elaine. Elaine, if you want to unmute and ask your question, try to keep it under 30 seconds.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So there are all kinds of various water rights that have come into existence since the 1907 Water Code was initiated, including vested water rights and the MRGCD sort of junior water rights, which make us have more water rights than exist with wet water. Then we add the permit system on there. What kind of arrangements do you see that might be possible for us to get our handle on all these crazy systems that we have allowed to profligate?
I'll take that one. So we do have, I don't know that they're all there's a little bit more of a kind of a unifying theory around most of those rights than it may appear. I won't go into all the nitty gritty, but as I understand it, the real nub of the question is we got a lot of junior water rights out there and we don't have enough water to satisfy them. How could we possibly do that? And my answers are, we as water administrators don't want to impose solutions that may or may not be solutions that work for various communities and groups. We'd rather they develop organically through either the planning process or other places from the users themselves. But in general, what we've had, the patterns we often see is a lot of the junior users are either municipal or commercial or industrial uses. And they have junior water rights, they do have money. And so some, compensated, one of the terms we use in our regulations is replacement water. So, okay, your water right is out of priority. You're going to have to pay someone who's a senior user who is in priority and obtain their water as replacement water. That's kind of the crudest solution. Other solutions are shared reductions. So they don't have to be across the board the same. So the junior user might have to cut back by 50%, while the senior user cuts back by 10%. But it's a shared reduction. And again, these are the types of arrangements that can be negotiated. There's a relatively small number of the really large water rights holders, which sort of makes negotiation possible. But those are some of the types of arrangements that we've had in certain parts of the state. You want to add anything there?
Yeah, and in the Middle Rio Grande, there already is, at least from an agricultural diversion and use perspective, is a shared utilization of water independent of an individual's water right. The pre-1907 component of the water in the Middle Rio Grande is a measure of its value and transferability, if indeed it's been declared and recognized by the state engineer as such. But as an agricultural user, they're on par with all the agricultural users, with the exception of the Pueblo's prior and paramount water. So in a sense, it's a kind of a shared large acequia system, really, in the way that it's managed today. So the juniors and the seniors are already sharing that resource in that regard.
Thanks. And I'm just going to read a quick question that's related to a previous question about the Texas v. New Mexico. So Sig Siebler has noted that he's seen what the special master has recommended, but was the consent decree issued and is it available?
Thank you. I'm glad that question came up. So the consent decree is available. It's a little bit hard to find, but I'll try and explain how to do it, and we might be able to put into the comments sort of the way to get there. It has not been issued yet. So the way that these Supreme Court disputes happen is the Supreme Court appoints a special master to take in evidence and then write a report and recommendation, and then the Supreme Court will allow the parties to the dispute to file exceptions, which is a funny word for objections, to the report. And then the Supreme Court decides whether to accept the report or not. And the stage we are at now is in July, the special master issued the report. And then in 2 weeks, the deadline is the deadline for parties to file exceptions to the report with the Supreme Court. And then there will be about 6 weeks out responses to those exceptions, and then a final round of briefing after that. The state of New Mexico is an enthusiastic proponent of the report, and so we will not be filing exceptions to the report. We anticipate the United States will, and so they'll do that, I believe, October 6th, and then there will be a round of briefing that will end in December, and then there will be likely oral argument in front of the Supreme Court itself sometime in the spring, February, March, or April, and then a decision by June. And so if the Supreme Court accepts the report, the consent decree will be issued at that time. If it does not accept the report, it will remand the case to the special master for further proceedings. And so we don't have the consent decree in place right now. If people would like to see the consent decree, they can actually see basically all the pleadings in the case to date. And the easiest way to do it is if you just Google Texas v. New Mexico 8th Circuit. So like 6th, 7th, 8th, like 8th Circuit. That's the 8th Judicial Circuit, and that's the court on which the judge who is the special master sits on. And so his court maintains an electronic docket. That will give you the electronic docket for the proceedings before the special master. There was a motion to enter the consent decree filed jointly by the states in November of 2022. So motion for entry of consent decree or some language like that in November of 2022. If you click on that, the consent decree is an attachment there. So it's not exactly the most easy and straightforward just place to grab the consent decree. I think there are plenty of other places online where it's probably available, but that's the surefire one I know that it's there. And it also gives people an opportunity, if they want to look at all the pleadings in the case, to kind of see the twists and turns.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Maybe if someone has that link handy, we can put it in the chat. But maybe also it can be included in follow-up after this.
You know, I'll talk this, Andrew. I mean, I think we can probably put it in hot topics on the OSC website as well.
Okay.
We'll let you know if and when we've done that. Yeah.
Thanks. All right, our next question is from Denise. Denise, if you want to go ahead and unmute, and please try to keep it within 30 seconds.
I'll try. So thank you both, all three of you. It's been great. I've got a question about the intent in restoring the low flow conveyance channel. I think, in the year 2023, the idea of putting the river in a channel rather than allowing the river to be a river is one that's going to be inherently contentious. And the only thing that was mentioned for immediate plans for the Middle Rio Grande water use was the notion of the fallowing program that's underway. I really enjoyed the presentation on alternative administration. We've got to be there, right? I mean, we understand, and the OSC is not contesting the effect of climate change and what we will no longer call the drought, climate change on water availability in the Middle Rio Grande. So why bring up a 1950s engineering solution when what we need is alternative administration? And for everybody to be clear, the effect of the low flow is to drain the river, and it drains the river just by its presence, which is a reason we need to get rid of the low flow rather than start to reoperate it. All sorts of questions, all sorts of opposition from the environmental community to a really important stretch of the river, which has high ecological value. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Denise, for that question. And you and I have discussed this, and there's been some other forums that the environmental community and the water managers have been conducting in recent months to really drill into this situation. It's a facility that, as you said, was constructed in the 1950s to solve a 1950s problem. And back in those days, there was such scant availability of surface water flow that the low flow was really the only option to get water down to Elephant Butte for a number of years. And I do agree that the way it was operated in that period of time was not environmentally sound, for sure. What's being put on the table and for study and discussion is optimizing the utilization of both the river channel and the low flow to both maintain and even enhance the ecological values that are inherent in that reach. And some of that is even the low flow itself, where at the current outfall, it goes off to the west and creates quite a large lake that creates a large loss and depletion there for not a high ecological value from the standpoint of riparian habitat and endangered species habitat. So the idea would be to optimize the resource, ultimately have one channel somewhere located down below the San Marshall Bridge, and have a dual channel to the extent that when there's right flow conditions, whether it's during the peak of the runoff or during monsoonal events where there's very high flashy flow events, a certain quantity of it can be efficiently delivered down to Elephant Butte. And by doing that, it allows the state of New Mexico to meet its compact obligations year in and year out, and allows for storage of snowmelt runoff in Alvado that alternatively allows for consistent water availability in the dead of the summer months, where we struggle mightily to keep even the river in Albuquerque wet during those times. So to deny the opportunity to allow for that comprehensive approach from Cochiti Dam all the way down to Elephant Butte, when you can also enhance the ecological values in the Santa Casia Reach with good investments and habitat construction and things that have not been able to be done in that reach for a variety of reasons, would set us up for this continual cycle of not having enough operational flexibility to keep environmental flows in the entire river, not just in the Santa Casia Reach.
Thanks. So our next question is from Norm. I'll go ahead and read that. So what are your thoughts about completing as many prerequisites, like working to form the entity and assembling the required data to support models in parallel with completing the Interstate Stream Commission's formal rules and less formal guideline process? And this is obviously related to the regional water planning question.
Yep. Well, that's a really good question, because there are a lot of things that can be done in parallel. And it's a resource issue, really. We have our planning team that's forming. We've been able to grow it a little bit. We want to grow it more. But we also have investments going on in the Water Data Act. We have investments going on in other areas associated with understanding the resource better. And so this combination of forming the entities in an outreach component could also start to share their understanding and knowledge, and maybe even some of their resource capabilities, to work with us in parallel as we're developing the rules and the procedures for implementing regional planning. So I think a lot of that can be done. There's also going to be quite a bit of discussion on Indian water rights settlements with the 6 Middle Rio Grande Pueblos in this region, and I think a certain amount of progress in that regard can also help them engage in the planning probably more effectively than they may not be while they're sort of still in the shadows of their water rights situation. So we're totally open to that parallel approach.
Great, thanks. And we're kind of related to some of this data that we know that we need. Susan, you have a question on state database inventorying. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
I think actually there was an answer in the chat for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Susan just asked that if it was true, if there is no state database inventorying the number and capacity of wells tapping groundwater in the state. And it sounds like that was answered in the chat. So you can scroll up and look at that if you missed it. Next question is, how big an issue is illegal water use in the Middle Rio Grande? And do you have plans to enforce against illegal water use?
Nat may have a view of the scope of any of the problem, but I under the current administration procedures, we do have a handle on the majority of permitted water use. We do know that there's potential and activity that we've come across and figured out how to address it. Is there's some illegal well drilling that's occurring, particularly as the drought exacerbates. There could be a more opportunity for people to take advantage of that. There's unlicensed well drillers that operate in the Middle Valley that we've run across at times. And we are trying to ramp up our enforcement capacity on that. But any of the, I guess you'd call it standard permitted water right users, typically, follow the rules for the most part. I would say within 90% of the occasions. As a former CEO of the MRGCD, it was a challenge to make sure that there was a good water scheduling and proper farmer use of their allotted time And I know we spent a lot of effort on that. The district continues to do that to make sure that people aren't over irrigating and they're irrigating within their allotted time to do so. And that's an ongoing issue that I think is getting better and better over time as well.
Yeah, I think I'd add, I mean, there is illegal water use. We don't know everything we don't know, but we are aware of some illegal water use. In terms of, is that what's, driving our water crisis? The answer is no. It's sort of second order type stuff, but we take it seriously because if everybody else is playing by the rules, we need everyone to feel as though the rules are being applied across the board. So we take very seriously, and we do investigate and take action on illegal water use. The MRGCD does too, and within its district. We have some 1907 era tools for dealing with illegal water use, and we last session brought a bill to upgrade our enforcement powers. We didn't get it through, but we're going to be trying again. And if it's a water user with a permit, if we catch them over diverting, they'll have to pay back double of the amount of water, which means it's not going to be worthwhile for them if they get caught. And they have to turn in meter readings, so we can usually catch them. The harder thing for us to corral is this the totally illegal, the wildcat type, somebody who doesn't have a water right at all, or who's trying to operate a commercial grow house out of a domestic well that's not metered. For them, the payback of water isn't as big of a deterrent because they don't have a water right, a big water rate to pay back with. And we would like the ability to do appropriate monetary penalties there. We can get monetary penalties right now for illegal water use, but they have not been increased since 1907. So we think that's overdue, and all we are asking for is an inflation adjustment. And then we think we'll have a good panoply of enforcement tools. We still go after these people. We still pursue them to the fullest extent of the law. It's very resource intensive, but we would like some more deterrence.
Great. Well, we are pushing right up on our time, so that'll be our last question. And I just wanted to again say thank you both so much for your time tonight. It's been really educational, and I think the wide diversity and breadth of questions that we saw from you all also just underscores how important water management, water planning is, and really underscores the need for everyone to be involved in these conversations. And so I want to make sure that it's on your radar. These panels are hosted by the Water Advocates for New Mexico and the Middle Rio Grande. And this one is co-hosted by 350.org, Interfaith Power and Light, and New Mexico Wild. But they are monthly events. Next month, October 19th, the topic will be what is the public interest in Middle Rio Grande water management, with Barbara Baca and Eric Olivas. We really encourage you to join that. That is really going to be kind of the start of what we heard from many folks around the table and from you all today, of the need for this community conversation about what it means to build resilience and how do we ensure that all of our shared values are recognized as we move forward into a future of increased water scarcity and increased uncertainty in many ways. So just a reminder to please go ahead and register for that. That'll be October 19th. As always, you'll receive a survey related to this particular panel. Please do fill that out. It helps the water advocates figure out how to improve these and just continue to make these better. And I think Brittany has one more final request from you all, and then we'll end right on time. Brittany?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm just going to drop the survey link into the chat for you guys. If you could take that, it really helps us plan our next speaker series. And the other thing we would love to ask of you is if you are able to, we are an all volunteer organization, and we could really use some help with funding to do more events like this. We have so many programs that we are working on right now, and you're going to be getting information about all of those. But if you are able to donate, we would be very grateful if you would do so. I will post a link in the chat to our PayPal account. And if you're not able to donate, we completely understand. If you would prefer to volunteer with us, please let us know. We have lots of tasks that many people could help with. So thank you so much for your attendance tonight. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event in October.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Right.